Hi everyone, I'm Seth Markzon, and I am here with Ilya Tabakh, a curious entrepreneur and CEO of Edge Up Sports. Ilya, thanks for joining me this morning.
Good to be here. Good to be here, Seth.
So Ilya is from Moscow, Russia. You're an avid traveler, but then you were raised in Kansas. Talk about that experience. How is it going from Moscow, Russia, and then transitioning into Kansas?
Night and day. Probably the shortest way to put it. I was actually pretty young when I moved, so I was 7.5 when my family and I immigrated to Kansas City, and so it was kind of a trip of many firsts for me. It was the first real kind of set of plane trips. My family and I used the soda fountain for the first time in Frankfurt.
Oh
And
wow.
so it was a lot of, literally leaving what was still Soviet Russia at the time and going Frankfurt, London, New York, spending a couple weeks in New York just to kind of get our affairs in order and then actually come to Kansas.
Hmm.
And so Moscow at the time was almost 10 million people, I think maybe 9, something like that. And so there was times where you can go out in places of the city, and I remember my parents would take me out and there'd be lots of people walking around, hundreds of thousands, or at least tens of thousands. It seemed like a lot more, to a kid. 10 people probably seemed like it's 1,000, but I remember I have like these memories of just lots and lots and lots of people walking around, and that just doesn't really happen, not just in Kansas City, but in a lot of places in the country. So only maybe in like Times Square and Chinatown in New York, and a couple other places, do I kind of feel that and see that in some of the places that I've traveled. Yeah, and then Kansas City, at the time, less than 2 million people, now almost 2.5 million people, metropolitan area, very spread out, um, a lot less dense in places, but, kind of a different approach. It's also the difference between the Russian culture and the American culture and kind of Midwestern culture, and so it's
Oh, you mean
a
they're
lot of
not the same?
not necessarily, no. I don't know how much time you spent in Manhattan, New York, compared to Iowa or Kansas City or even Dallas, Texas. They're very, very, very different places. Even LA, within LA itself, has a couple different touches into the American culture, and so Kansas City is no different in that there is its own kind of feel and environment. It's an interesting place, but it's a great place. I've grown up here, and I've gotten this is home for me now, and so it's kind of a very interesting perspective. But it definitely was a lot of changes in a very short period of time.
Oh, I can imagine. And personally, I've been to Kansas one time, and I would love to go back. I'd love to go check out a Jayhawks game, and then go across the way and go see Kansas State play as well. Those teams are fantastic to watch. Me being an avid sports lover. Want to jump into one thing. Fast forward a couple years. Now you have a BS and MS degree in computer engineering from Kansas, and you got your MBA in Oslo, Italy. Did I say that right?
Yeah, it was a summer executive MBA. So toward the tail end of my computer engineering degree, I actually went to a program in Italy, and so it was over kind of business process improvement and kind of Kepner Trio and Six Sigma and a couple things like that. And so it was a program where it was about a month, and we really got into dive into kind of northern Italian business culture and kind of back to doing business different at a different pace with different cultural
Wait,
expectations.
time out, time out, time out. Okay, so you said Italian business culture, and then going back to or transitioning back to the style that you're used to. Can you kind of touch on some of those business styles?
There's a lot more kind of personal touch. Americans get dinged a lot for just being very quick to get down to business. You walk in the room, you shake hands, you sit down, then you bust out the contract, right? That's less of the case in northern Italy and many other parts of the world, where there's a little bit more formal dining, getting to know people, that kind of thing. And I think it's still definitely practiced here as well, but it seems to be more structured and rigorous in kind of Italy and maybe continental Europe in general. Um, but they also had a lot of very interesting kind of tech and used IT and manufacturing and risk management, and we're very modern in many sentences. And so it was very interesting to see kind of this juxtaposition of what used to be a monastery and above it being a outpost for the Roman army that was kind of looking into the Alps paired with the United Colors of Benetton and like lots of mills and presses and all this other kind of things all really at the same place. Yeah, no, so it's just a different speed, very, kind of rich culture, lots of tradition, very kind of hard stop in the middle of the day where people take a little bit of time off. And that was
Doesn't
a little
sound half
interesting.
bad.
No, it's not bad. It's not bad. It's just different. Definitely no complaints in the department, but they definitely took kind of rest and communication and kind of hanging out in a little bit of a different lens than I was perhaps used to.
Okay. Wow. So, after you got your after you did the summer executive MBA, I wanna go ahead and move towards your passion, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but your passion is developing a deep understanding for human reaction. Am I on point there?
Yeah. So it started with kind of looking with complex systems, and then the complex system that I really locked in on was the system of humans. And so how humans interact, and like many of the complex systems in the world, whether it's policy, government, or even sports, are a system of humans, trying to do something together. And so there's a pretty rich background in systems engineering where it wasn't humans, it was computers, routers, switches. The internet is a complex system.
Mm-hmm.
The switches are much, much more regular and dependent, dependable, I guess is the term, because they follow a very strict set of instructions. And so they know what to do in many situations. Humans are much more interesting in that, you and I are talking right now. We're using words. We're also kind of using video in this case, looking at each other. And that's a much more kind of complex and interesting set of interactions. And so I really dug into that after already being very fascinated with kind of complex systems and some of the tools there.
Oh, wow. Okay. So with all that being in mind here, you started your own business, Somametrics. How did you take what you just told me and apply that to not only just going after your passion, but also creating a structural business to help others out?
Sure, yeah. So the first Somametrics was actually started. Somametric was started around the concept of what could you do with a gigabit that involved reaction. And our idea, the thing that we really brought to the table, was wouldn't it be really cool if we had the Viewer's Choice Award, where the viewers actually chose something with their facial reaction, right? Oh, wow. So I tell a joke. Yeah, exactly. You're like, okay, that's fascinating, right? And I'm like, okay, so Seth thinks it's fascinating. 100 other people think it's fascinating. Let's give an award on that. Let's not do it on Seth thinks that, Ilya's a nice guy by clicking 1 on his keyboard. Because that's you're actually thinking about it, and you're like, well, what should I tell Ilya? Because, I really think what he's saying is crazy, but I think he's not a terrible guy, so I'm going to tell him that's the his idea, right? And we wanted to get further away from that and more to the actual reaction. So, as people react, there's certain things where you can pick up on what the real feelings are, not the things that they're telling you necessarily. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're not. And what we wanted to do was to build a platform to show video and then capture reaction back. And we actually built the prototype, worked on that for a while. It was a really, really bad customer fit for us. So we kind of spun our wheels for about we always like to say, and we think it's kind of funny, it's good to laugh at yourself every once in a while, we didn't check the reaction of our customers well enough. And by the time we kind of had the prototype and we were going to make some sales, they didn't really end up buying. Oh. So we took that knowledge of kind of reaction and many of the things, both how to measure and how to be intentional with experience, and moved that to the physical space. And so currently we're working on helping people be kind of intentional with the experience that they're delivering on the consulting side. And then also, how can you measure that once you actually have an idea of what you think? And then once you have a good understanding there, how can you improve that? So is it a physical installation? Is it connecting certain lights with the social, with your social footprint so people can interact? And so we've kind of turned in this past year, 2014, and still kind of this year, as more of a company helping people really be intentional understand whether their intention is actually happening in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and then how to improve experience and interaction. And so that's still, so the metric is still kind of going in that space.
Oh wow, that's really interesting. Uh, and there's so much that goes into that.
Oh
So
yeah.
with all of that being said, it really sounds like you're taking communications and reactions and taking it to the next level. Can you kind of touch on what communications is to you and how it is simple, but it's really not simple?
Yeah. So my real fascination with this started when I was involved in a super low budget movie in LA. Actually, probably not too far from where you're sitting. And my friends were geeking out on kind of the production side. How do we do all of the things before we get the finished movie into the can? And my kind of contribution to that conversation, other than also helping shoot and doing all these other things, was, wouldn't it be really cool if we can tell people like the movie? And so my initial reaction to that was like, well, we can just kind of act like people radars, right? Scan them, measure that, and then understand how they feel. But at the time, I didn't have really the social science background, the psychology, sociology, even anthropology. Like, we both know we're on video right now, and so that may affect the way that we react. Whereas if we were just walking around in the store, and mall, or park, right?
Fair enough.
And so anthropology actually has contributed a couple different approaches on how to mitigate some of that expectation bias. And so when we know we're being watched, we tend to change our reaction. And so we taking it to the next level, and really, it's not so much taking it to the next level. It's really having a deep understanding on what you're seeing, what that means, how you're actually measuring, and then what impact does that have on something you care about, right? And so, kind of that deep understanding allows you to target what ultimately is maybe 10 different disciplines, whether it's computer engineering, computer vision, all kinds of sensor stuff, psychology, sociology, anthropology, and others, and combine them to meet some kind of outcome. And that's really kind of where we've done some work on that and on the metric side, but really also what's enabling us to do some pretty cool things on the edge up side as well.
And this all came from being an assistant producer on feature-length comedy, huh?
This all came from having really interesting conversations after the production meeting, and after you're kind of sitting down. My friends were trying to, their company was actually called Break Hollywood, and they've gone and done different things in film and others beyond. So I don't think Break Hollywood's still a thing. Okay. But they were really trying to think about, how do you do this? How can you get talented actors? How can you create really cool content? And they were just trying to, think different about an industry that's been established and has done lots of great things. And in that environment, they asked some questions that I'm like, that's really interesting. I answered like my initial reaction, but I'm like, that's my gut reaction. I'm going to think about that a little bit. And that sort of stuck with me really, partially on the back burner for probably 2-3 years. And then over a dinner with the co-founder of Metric, Tim West, we were talking about, kind of ideas and things we were working on. And Kansas City actually had just gotten the Google Fiber deployment, so the first Google Fiber deployment in the country. Mm-hmm. And they were talking about, okay, so we have this infrastructure, what could we do? And that was, I was talking to Jim at the time. I'm like, I had this idea. And he's like, that's really interesting, right? And so the idea just, it never died. And so it kind of has, and continues to have a bit of a life of its own, on how can we use kind of reaction and a deep understanding of humans to do interesting things.
Well, case in point right there. You have this tremendous and amazing conversation, then all of a sudden you have this idea, and you want to put it into practical application. I mean, that's human reaction, and then bam, now all of a sudden I'm here and you're there. And moving into Edge Up Sports, how did that come from, everything that you've done?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I've been playing fantasy football for 10 years now, with my friends, kind of college buddies and, that kind of thing. And so I was kind of generally aware of what that looked like. I set my lineup and I would listen to interviews, that kind of thing. And I was looking at some of the tools that continue to become available, and really some of the stuff we were working on at Metric. I was like, there's very interesting like data and information ways to make our lives easier and make this better, and also see and potentially distill deeper insights from the stuff that we were seeing. And so I was talking to a buddy of mine that was in social media for one of the teams, and I was like, why aren't we actually using the stuff the players put out and information that's being generated, and make that useful for fantasy football managers like myself and 26 more million of them. There's a lot of people spending a lot of time, hours and hours, reading blogs, watching interviews, all this other stuff. Can we kind of collect that information, clean that up, and then very cleanly present that to them? So, I'm not trying to take away SportsCenter, and I'm not trying to take away, all the media stuff that people enjoy. But if you're in a hurry on a Wednesday and you want to know, hey, what's going on between these couple waiver wire guys, you can get a snapshot of things that they're doing today. And that was kind of, we had the tools and kind of the understanding and background to do that. Like, why aren't we doing that? And the answer came back repeatedly as, I don't know, why aren't we doing that? That's a really good idea. Kind of dug into how would we actually do that. And, then we kind of got off the races. We kind of introduced the concept and got a lot of decent feedback on it. And so, it's just a continuation of an idea that won't die. And it's a really, kind of interesting and fascinating area.
It really is. And, like we were speaking before, everyone over, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but of those who like sports in America, at least 50% of them play fantasy football. So you've got a large market here, and what you're trying to produce can definitely help others. Can you touch on exactly what would a fantasy manager, what type of value would a fantasy manager get from using Edge Up Sports versus, the analytics from an ESPN or an NBC Sports?
Sure. Yeah, so I guess to take a little bit of a step back, Edge Up Sports is looking to build kind of the richest data set around the league, and then make that data very cleanly presented to people that care. And so on the first pass to us, it's kind of collecting Twitter activity, other text-based stuff, and organizing that in a really clean visualization. So when you're managing your roster on a weekly basis, there's a lot of information about statistics. There's a lot of projections that are going on from the statistics. Then there's expert analysis on how people think the player's going to do. And a lot of people kind of have a favorite analyst or 2 or 5, right? I think the average fantasy football player goes to 5 websites to kind of get their content every week. And so there's already a lot of data there, but a lot of the data isn't generated from activity of the player and activity of the coaches themselves. And so what we're looking to do is kind of organize that and introduce it as a signal for the first pass, so for the thing that we're trying to roll out for 2015, 2016. The idea, though, is that we actually want to work with kind of interested and engaged users, kind of our customers, to build that tool and really build what is the value proposition. We think that the cleanest data set and the cleanest experience are very important, but we also know that notifications and just getting information in a timely manner, as well as even in some cases effective smack talking. I think we joked about this a little bit, but really what we're looking to do is find kind of interested and passionate fantasy football players and managers in order to build and apply the richest data set in the NFL to make their lives better and easier, and ultimately get them an edge up to win. And that's kind of the longer term play. So initially the value is that they get a signal that they can integrate into their decision making. So they see, hey, LaShawn McCoy and Jamal Charles, stat-wise, they're the same. Experts are saying they're the same. But here's some first-person activity. And they could be like, what do I think this means to me? Right? And make that decision quickly.
Do you have any specific... Oh, I'm sorry for cutting you off. My apologies. But do you have any specific examples that you've seen where if someone did have that information, it would have helped them in their game?
Yeah, we've had a couple. They're very anecdotal at this point, but there's definitely points both when people start using Twitter more often and then when they go off Twitter, they have kind of bad in different games. And so really our initial visualization is the amount of activity per week. And so time of day as well as day of the week, watching how many tweets and what the activity is, and then showing you what average for that player is. And so really what we're looking for is their activity normal or not? And then we're also looking for a couple of things published in interviews that they're doing and looking at, can we roll in some of the analysis as well. But we're definitely going to come out with some of the Twitter and some of the first-person generated stuff for this season. And we're looking at, whether we can hit some of these other interesting metrics as well.
Okay. So
that makes sense?
Absolutely does. 3 years down the road, where do you see Edge Up Sports? How is it affecting the fantasy football market?
Sure. So for this upcoming season, we start to aggregate and combine some of the first-person text-based stuff. Mm-hmm. We're going to roll out the visual and audio-based stuff also. And then as we are able to deliver the richest data view over the NFL, and we have also, so that's the first-person stuff, and the statistics stuff, and some of the social conversation. And we know every week how people play. We can do a lot of interesting things with that data. And we're already starting to look at what is the mechanism by which you can take this really rich data set and set of signals and actually get to a point where you start to understand and start to see what may be more likely to happen for the outcome for a player. And so we can start to get predictive and also start to look at what are the most important signals. Is it whether people are anxious? Is it amount of, activity? Is which one of these signals is actually most indicative of success for a type of player or position? And we can start to really learn these things. But really give people some of the best tools, actually the best tool available that I'm aware of, to go in there and say, hey, I think my running back's going to do this. And we can say, instead of, yeah, we think so too, we can say that based on kind of the statistical and computational evaluation, we're actually pretty sure that's going to happen. And that's much more advanced than many of the things that are being done. And using things that are not just statistics in the game, but also mindset, situational, are they in a contract year, and looking to bring some of these data points into the discussion also.
Okay, so with all that being said, the question has to be asked. You watched the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
You watched it. You know what happened.
I do.
2nd down and 1. 28 seconds left. What do the statistics say? What you have Marshawn Lynch. You're on the 1-yard line. Yeah, I get it. You have 2 timeouts or 1 timeout. I mean, what would Edge Up Sports have any statistical data to determine what would happen there?
So the Super Bowl is a huge outlier, and it's very, very hard to predict the Super Bowl. And so where we're really looking to kind of build into is the regular season, and something where fantasy football managers would be gaining a lot of value from that. The Super Bowl is weird for a lot of reasons. There's time off. The emotional engagement is different. There may have been things that we could have looked at and some tools that we could have built, but that's not really where we're focusing for Edge Up. And so the other things in statistics is that statistics is using past kind of data and history. What is the likelihood that more than random this happens, right? When you're right now, when you and I are talking about something, I can try to do something or I can fail at it. But the thing is, if I try to do something and succeed, then it's 100% that I succeeded, right? And so that's the nice thing about the future, is that statistics only inform and tell you how likely something is. Nothing that they were trying to do was impossible. And we can talk about, what's the likelihood of failure, how often does it happen in that stage, but then there's also all kinds of things about how are people feeling, where is their mind in the game, Are they laser focused? And many of these things, there's not good ways of judging that. And so if we were to kind of dig into that problem, I think that's the angle I would take. But for Edge Up Sports, we're really looking at the regular season where things are repeatable. People are training Wednesdays, getting sleep, doing all this normal stuff, because the Super Bowl is so weird in so many different ways that it's a much longer, we could probably have a very long conversation about that one question where things would get interesting, but maybe we would lose some focus on our own and like kind of peeling apart some of these very interconnected and complicated things.
Yep. Yeah,
but it's a great question. I was asking myself that question too. One of the reasons I probably wouldn't focus on the Super Bowl is it's less value to the fantasy football manager.
It's true.
And it's much weirder and different, and so there isn't as much data points and information to even dig into there.
Okay. So you're Pete Carroll. What do you do?
I'm Pete Carroll. What do I do? I've definitely leaned to the position of, throw the ball in order to keep them honest, but you don't throw a quick slant through the middle because I don't know if you saw it, but even if they had completely missed it, if there's the entire secondary was still, there's linebackers back there, there's many other people to hit even after that. And so, but again, this is a kind of like a, what do you think? All this other kind of stuff.
Hindsight's 20/20, right? I mean,
yeah, hindsight. Well, it's like, the thing is, so in physics, there's this thing called the two-body problem, and anytime you have more than two objects and you try to forward predict where they're going to end up after a certain period of time, it actually becomes mathematically really, really complicated. However, when you're at that point in the future and you look back, you see all the events that happen. And so it's very obvious that, well, yeah, I mean, like that did this and this did that. And it's completely obvious. But mathematically, to do it from today going forward, and if we did it from halftime, saying, what are the sets of plays that are going to happen? The amount of possible combinations there is insane, right? And then to actually be able to map that today looking forward is really hard. But where we're sitting right now talking, we saw those things, and so that eliminates a lot of this other stuff that could have potentially happened. And so we're like, that was obvious, and we tell ourselves a really good story that obviously in every situation this, and we kind of pull data points, or this supports my argument, this supports my argument, and then there's this other counterexample in 1974, and don't worry about that one. So humans are really, really interesting also in that stories and kind of our pattern matching, like we're expert pattern matching, right? You see three shells in the crack, you're like, what's the pattern? I see a pattern, right? And we're no different in sports where we kind of see the pattern. We have a lot of deeply seated subconscious systems even where they're really good at that. And then we find kind of a story and some other things to tell. So, it's really, 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 really easy from where we're sitting to tell really good stories, and they sound very compelling. It's much harder to be at the half-yard line on, minutes away from the end of the Super Bowl, actually less than minutes. But yeah, and that's a whole different situation. So I think it's interesting. I think it's a really good beer conversation, but I think it's unfair ultimately from what we actually have.
Well, to all good points that you bring up there, and maybe Pete Carroll should study physics. I don't know, but but Ilya, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for just really teaching us more about human reaction and sharing everything about Edge Up Sports and how you become what you are, and all the cool stuff that's happening. If someone wanted some information about Edge Up Sports, where do you recommend they go?
They should just go check out the page, edgeupsports.com. We haven't been super active on Twitter because we've been more heads down and actually building, but if they tweet at us, we'll definitely reply back. We're pretty open, Facebook page, Twitter, but it's all on the website. So if they come check it out, they can kind of see where we're going. Sign up for kind of the mailing list and the newsletter, and we'll definitely onboard some of them for kind of the alpha testing, and then we'll be ready for the season.
Perfect. All right, well, Ilya, thank you so much for joining us, and I wish you the best of luck. Thank you.
I appreciate it, Seth. Thank you.
Okay.